Hey everyone, welcome back. Here we are, make share my screen, and here we go. So greetings, thanks for joining us again. And also, lovely to see Elly, Chad, and Nick. Hi everyone.
Hey Sam.
So let me make sure you can see my screen. There we go, should be unpaused now. And hi Jay, Sharon, and Kent. Happy Training Monday, yes, absolutely. And it's all looking and sounding great, brilliant. So the usual few things, just to say that hello, welcome, thanks for joining us. Yes, we're recording this, and yes, we've got extra links in the PDF. Really, that's the fast version. But just in case this is your first time joining us, every time we run one of these sessions, we want to give you extra resources and also share the link to the recording. So I'm on the Maxon events page at the moment. And by the way, this is a great way to find about future sessions. And this very Thursday, we're running a fantastic session with the amazing Angie Taylor. She's an artist that I've known for many years, and she's going to be talking about digital art and her experience. And she's also been a long time cinema and After Effects trainer. So I really encourage you to log into that. She's got some really interesting things she got to say about combining real world sculpture and actually digital sculpture. So that's going to be fantastic. So that's this Thursday, and you sign up in the usual way. Just click on that link. We record all these sessions. So if you missed last week's session with the amazing John Lepore, where we talked collectively about the approach for creating these fantastic, futuristic, fake, fabulous UI designs. I forget what the F stands for now. Insert your own meaning there. But basically, what he has been doing with Perception Studio, and that's a wonderful conversation. So please have a look at that. And also, if you would like to test your knowledge on any of the Maxon tools, you can go over to the Learn button or the Learn link on maxon.net and click on certification. And we've got this free 1 hour test, not only for cinema, but for all the Red Giant suites as well. And that's a really great way of testing your knowledge and finding out if where you can do some more study. And we've been putting together some specific tutorials, and Nick's made recently many 20-second tips for lots of these things, which are great memory joggers too. So please have a look at those. Those are also on the YouTube site. And here's the links thing I was talking about. If you go into the handout section of the webinar, you can see this PDF. And we've got links from last week, some of the things John was talking about. We've got a project file downloads Dropbox area. So when we put in any project files over the course of this month, we'll put those things in there. And also, thank you for joining us. And just like we would do in a real world kind of scenario where we're interfacing in person, we'd offer you a free t-shirt. So we want to do the same again. So there's all the information on that. And this month's password is Maxon FUI. And all you have to pay for is shipping, which is $3 or $4 or euro, depending where you are. Fantastic. Great. So as Pedro says, FUI for the win. Excellent. And we say GUI for FUI. Thank you, Aaron. This stuff writes itself, doesn't it? Cool. So what we're going to do this week is that Elly, Chad, and Nick have been delving into their favorite things in terms of inspirations for these FUI interface elements, and also cross-referencing that with nice creative ways of getting there more quickly, because the classic thing is you're designing these things that are going to be on screen for a handful of seconds, and you want to be able to communicate with people but also not spend forever making them. So we've got some nice tips with that. So let me hand over to Elly, who's going to show us some fantastic stuff, I believe, in cinema and using the Pose library.
Yes. Right, let me just show my screen.
As Jay says, Hong Kong Fui, which was a hero of mine when I was growing up as a cartoon character. So maybe there's a crossover design that we could do for him later on.
All right, cool. Standard question, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. So I was trying to think of something like a cool technique I could show in Cinema 4D that relates to, the topic of FUI. And I had a look through some of Perception stuff, so the links from last week's sort of webinar show. And I came across this, and let me just play this. So I've turned this down to like 0.25 speed because it only comes on for like a second, and I want like the playback to be kind of nice for you guys to see it. So in a sec, this effect here. So this kind of like expanded view effect of this model, I thought I could show quite quickly how to do this by using like the Pose Morph Tags in Cinema 4D. And let me show you what I created. So this was kind of just like a final render that I tried to kind of, you know, match as close as possible to kind of Perception's like style. And then I did animation as well. It's just like a really quick 3-second one. Let me just play this through. So what I've got here, I've just got this car model, and I'm using the Pose Morph Tag to kind of make the tires and like the parts of the wheel kind of all come out. And so it just sort of pulls out like this. And I've sort of animated the camera as well, just for that like additional effect. Yeah, so I thought I'd show how to do this. Before we get into cinema, the model that I used, I'll link this in the thing, it was actually from Turbosquid. And there's a couple of reasons I chose this model. The first of which is the way it's been modeled to the topology is like really nice and clean. And that's just kind of like the first thing that you really want to go for when you're kind of either modeling something yourself or kind of buying a model online. The topology is quite like a key part of that. And it also allows me to, if I ever wanted to turn this into like a hologram effect, you can do that with the wireframe. And so if we've got this really nice wireframe, you can create, you know, that like FUI hologram model effect. The second reason was it was modeled in good old Cinema 4D. So instead of just getting an FBX file or an OBJ file, I actually got access to the .c4D file. And that's super handy because this is like a low poly version of it. So I have access to all of the individual elements that were modeled. And when it comes to wanting to create this expanded view effect, I want to control the position of each element within my kind of wheel. And so if this was an FBX model, if it was all one solid model, it'd be quite time consuming kind of separating that out. So that was, yeah, kind of the main reason I went for this one. And the third reason, which is just a little bonus, is it was actually rendered and textured in Redshift. And if you know me, you know I use Redshift. So yeah, that was a little additional benefit here. So
it's a really interesting thing. Sorry, Elly. It's a really interesting thing, that, isn't it? Where you start off with, you've got to create a particular topic, and that decision-making process about which particular model you use and what are the choices and why you would choose it a certain way. So some of those are very useful in terms of time saving, like the type of model and also the textures that you're expecting then and that you're used to working with.
Yeah, it's just things that you want to look for, I guess, when it comes to something. Like for me, the main thing is the individual elements. So the .c4d file was perfect because if it was all one kind of solid model, having to pull that apart would just take you a lot longer than having like the individual elements itself.
Yeah.
Cool. So here is like a low poly version, which I want to work with. All I've done is all the subdivision surface values I've changed to 0. And that's just so it's quicker for me to kind of show you guys on this webinar on like a live stream. All I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete all my materials. So we've got our, you know, standard Cinema 4D grey, and I'm going to have my just my normal shading. We don't need to see our lines. And so, yeah, what we're going to do, we're going to use the Pose Morph Tag. And within the Pose Morph Tag, we can control like a base pose and add additional poses, and then we can morph between them. So for like a set of objects, or like, for example, like the face of a character, sometimes you'd have it like angry, sad, and you can morph between the two. And so really quickly, I'm going to show you how that works, and then we're going to do it on the car model. So I'm just going to grab a cube and then a sphere. Pull my sphere over. And I'm just going to grab both and then press Option and G, and it's going to group them into a null. And on my null, that's where I'm going to add my Pose Morph tag. So if I right click we have access to all of our Cinema 4D tags, whether it's, Redshift, all our dynamic stuff. And under rigging, we have this Pose Morph Tag. And if we come down here, we have this mixing drop down, and the Pose Morph Tags allows us to morph between things like, the position, scale, the points, all these different things within our set of objects. And so what we want to do, there's two checkboxes here I want to use, and it's going to be the same when we do it on the car as well. So hierarchy is my first one, and that's because I've got like a group of objects within my null, and so they're all the children of my parent object. And so we need to make sure we have a hierarchy, so our Pose Morph knows to be looking at a hierarchy inside Cinema. And then the only other one I want to check is position, because I'm going to be moving the position and morphing between that. So as soon as I hit my position and check that, we get this new menu. We now have a mode. So we have our edit and our animate mode. We're going to look at both of those. For now, we're in edit. And then we have our poses. So we have our base pose, which is going to be our initial pose. And then we have, by default, it adds this secondary pose. And with this secondary pose selected, I can now move my cube and my sphere to create my, extremely fun animation. And then we can go into animate, and then let me just move that out of the way. And now we can animate our strength slider, and we are now animating or morphing between our base pose and our secondary pose. So if we go back to edit mode, we can do things like add another pose, and we could, set up our third pose, and then animate, and then you have individual sliders for all of these. And so that's a quick demonstration of how it works. Now let's do it on our car. So the only thing I'm going to animate here is our left wheel, which is this one here. So I'm not going to worry about anything else. But of course, if you were animating more of this car, you want to make sure your Pose Morph Tag is on your top null. Whereas because I'm only going to worry about the wheel for now, I only need to put my tag onto the front left wheel null. So grab my Pose Morph, and again, I'm doing the same thing, just hierarchy and position. And then with my secondary pose selected, I can just come in and we can, just sort of move these out. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to do this really quickly, just because I'm demoing this to you guys. Actually, I'm going to leave that tire there. And just a few more bits. So this is where all of these bits are going to end up in the end of my animation. So they're kind of just going to come out and create this nice expanded kind of pull out effect. And then just this last little bit here. Cool. Right. So we go back into the null, go into animate. And now as I animate my strength slider, as I pull this across, we're getting this really nice kind of expanded view effect. And it's super quick. I mean, we just set that up. And of course, the more you animate, or the more of the objects that you want to move out, the longer it's going to take. And of course, if you want to add some more poses, you can. But I mean, it's still relatively quick to do. And then all we need to do is I'm going to animate, I'm going to keyframe my strength slider. So I'm going to set my strength to 0 because I want it to start on my base pose. And on frame 0, I'm just going to hit a keyframe. And then let's say at frame 85, I want it to be fully expanded. So I'm going to pull it across to 100%, and I'm going to set another keyframe. Now, as you play through, we now have our expanded kind of animation happening. And so that's a nice quick way of setting up this effect, which is used in a lot of kind of, FUI effects.
What's the official term for this, Elly? It's is it pulled apart, or is it an expanded view?
I don't know. I say pulled apart, but that doesn't sound very technical. So maybe expanded view does sound a bit more fancy, doesn't it?
Sometimes you see this as a cutaway. Gino has said that exploded view actually is quite. In fact, Wayne and Brogan have said exploded view. So this is winning.
Okay, well, it's officially now exploded view.
There we are. And Sharon
Cool.
said
Right.
this is
Okay.
going to help her so much when she's keyframing instead of keyframing. So it's every little thing that helps. This is fantastic.
Yeah, it's such like a quick technique, and it looks so cool. Like it looks like in the little animation I did, I find it looks like you spent ages on it when really you just set in a couple of poses and animating a slider. But we don't tell anyone that,
No,
apart from
that's
everyone
not
sitting
quite
now.
the definition of design, but it does help. Make it look more expensive than the time you spent on it.
Yes, that's the goal, isn't it, for us all?
Sort of.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so that's the animation using the Pose Morph Tag, and now I wanted to run you guys through how I created the like X-ray texture. So if I kind of so this texture here I created in Redshift, and it's only a couple of nodes really using like a Fresnel shader in an alpha channel. So I thought that would be something like handy to show. We're just going to try and recreate the render I did really in 20 minutes. So I'm going to just create a Redshift material, and I'm going to grab an incandescent material. If I double click this, we get my shader graph. And so we've got our two nodes. We've got our incandescent node and we've got our output, which is what we're always going to have. And so within our incandescent, this is where we're going to determine the color of our X-ray shader. And so I had two. I had like a dark gray, blackish shader, as well as this sort of like bright orange one. And so all we do in here is we select our color. I went with like a dark gray, and that's our starting point. So this is the color that I want as my base kind of default color. And then all we need is two nodes. We need a Fresnel node, and I'll explain these in a sec, and then a ramp. And this is all we need. So if I plug my Fresnel straight into the surface of my output, we can see this preview up here. And this is like our Fresnel gradient. We have this sort of like white outer edge, and it kind of goes into sort of like a darker area. And we're going to use this Fresnel to create like a transparency effect. And so the white areas are going to be our solid grey colour, and it's going to go into a more transparent colour as it goes into the darker grey area. So if we plug this into our alpha channel in our incandescent, and then plug this into our surface, we can see exactly what's happening. We now have almost a completely transparent area in the middle and this tiny little dark grey edge here. And we can define this a bit more by changing the settings in our Fresnel. And so by default, we have this use IOR checked on. And if we check it off, we can then adjust our curve fall off. And this is adjusting the fall off between the facing color and the perpendicular color. But for now, and for what I want to do, I want to leave use IOR on, and then it's going to look at this index of refraction value, and it's going to base the curve fall off from that. And so I ended up with a value of 1.08. And then we need to adjust this extinction coefficient, which is the K value of our IOR. And I ended up with a 1.12. And now we're starting to get sort of a bit closer to the effect that we want. And this is where the ramp now comes in handy. So the ramp basically controls, using the ramp gradient here, a value of like 1 to 0 or 0 to 1. And we can use this to really control the look of the Fresnel and how it's affecting our alpha channel. So if I plug this into my input and then plug this into my alpha, if I now adjust this little white handle, if I pull it across, we can see that we're getting, what's happening is it's pushing more of the white values of the Fresnel, therefore we're getting more of the color. Whereas if we do the opposite and we push our black values, it's pushing the black values of our Fresnel, which are sort of like our transparent values, and now we're kind of, our shaders kind of disappeared a little bit, so we don't really want that. But we do want to push the whites a little bit, just to bring a bit more of this kind of color back in. And that was it. That was all I did for this kind of X-ray shader effect. And then I just duplicated that And if we come into our incandescent again, under the illumination tab, we can now choose this kind of, I don't know, orangey yellow color, which is what I put on my, like, on across like the tire and the wheel and those sort of objects.
How much time did you spend, Elly, by the way, doing to and fro between those different values until you found the kind of correct balance of transparency that made it work for you?
Joe, not too long, because it's only really like the Fresnel node that you're kind of defining. Like, so you could have done this without the ramp. I just like to use the ramp to control kind of the white and the black values a little bit more. But really, it's just sort of adjusting the kind of the fall off and the IOR in the Fresnel. And because there are only a couple of settings, it doesn't take kind of it's not like you've got like a whole kind of node graph of things you're having to worry about. So it wasn't too long.
There's a couple of comments coming in. Pedro says that as a tip, it finds that if you render an ambient occlusion path and invert it, you get some really nice glows as well.
Cool.
And is saying that the ramp node rules. Absolutely, we agree.
Yes.
Sharon was wondering if you wouldn't mind just saying what's the difference between an incandescent and material and making an emission material.
Yeah. So the incandescent. So we could create a Redshift material node, and then you can like she's saying, kind of increase the emission. But it's just the settings of the different nodes. So with a standard kind of Redshift material, we have access to all of these settings inside our material. So, you know, if you're creating like diffuse material or like a metal material, the chances are you'll be using the standard Redshift material. But because I don't need to use all these things, I just wanted to use the incandescent material for that and just have access to like the few settings that we had in there really for it, because all I'm doing is controlling an alpha channel as well. I didn't have to worry about using like a whole Redshift material for it.
Excellent. The other thing I was going to mention is that we had a couple of questions as you were going through exploding the tire view, the wheel, and Andrew was wondering about doing the same thing with a tire.
With this tire or like a tire?
That particular tire there. I suppose it depends on the modeling and how it was built together as well.
Yeah, so I could move the tire as a whole, but because the tire itself is an individual object, it would be a case of separating the individual polygons. So if you sort of had this in polygon mode, you could select the polygons and then you can split them, or you could turn them into like an additional object, and then that could then be pushed apart.
Got it.
Or exploded. Sorry.
It's all about the language. Yes, exactly.
Right, cool. So yeah, really quickly, I'm just going to sort of throw my materials on, and I'm just going to, you know, do this in a bit of a lazy way. So Command A, selected everything, and I'm going to grab my kind of darker material, and I'm just going to hit the apply button, and it's going to apply it to everything. And then I'm going to come into my wheel and then just sort of drop this on here. This is just, you know, for speed, because I'm conscious, because I know the guys have got some super cool stuff to show, and I don't want to take all the time. So let me just throw these on here. Cool, right, so yeah, so this is the two textures I ended up with. And then what I'm going to do, let me just really quickly grab a dome light, and I'm going to drop a HDR image from the asset browser onto here. And now if we go into our render view, just going to dock that to the side, and we can see what it looks like. Cool, yeah, so we're getting a bit closer to that final render. One thing I'm going to do, let me just grab a Redshift camera, because I had a bit of depth of field going on in my in my final render here. And let me get a wide angle just so we can create that nice sort of like slightly more stylized look. And then inside my camera, I can kind of define my focus distance. And I'm going to just choose sort of this middle kind of part of my wheel here. And then inside my Redshift Camera tag, I'm going to just override and enable my bokeh. And then we can, if I switch this on, we can put in a value of maybe like 2. So if I could do my render again, my animation, I'd have, you know, really upped my depth of field, sort of similar to it looks here. We've got some really kind of like intense depth of field going on, but I didn't have time to re-render. So, and yeah, so the last thing I did was I used a matrix object to sort of put matrices on the vertices of my model, and it then creates that, you know, the sort of, you know, spheres that we have here that looks like it's taking up the shape of our model. So if we really quickly just duplicate our vehicle null, and I'm going to select everything and then connect objects and delete. This just gives me a the solid object that I need for my matrix. Let me just delete all of those materials because I don't need those. And I'm just speeding through this just to quickly show you guys. So matrix in object mode, drag and drop your object into there. And then our distribution, we want to make sure we're distributing all of our matrices across the vertex of our model. And it's going to have a think about it because there's quite a few, this is why I did the low poly version, because if I did the high poly version, this, yeah, would have probably taken a bit of time. Let me go back into my matrix. So I've just hidden this from my scene because I don't need to see it. And I'm just going to change the scale of these matrices to value 0.1. And it's going to think about it. And this is the final step. We're going to right click on our matrix because our matrix doesn't create geometry in Cinema 4D. So you could drop this into a cloner with a sphere on it, and that will create the geometry, or we could do it this way by just using the matrix, dropping a Redshift object tag on it, and then it's clever enough to know that it's on the matrix object, so it gives you this particle tab. And if we set it to sphere instances and then a value of like 0.5, we can now grab just a plain old incandescent material again and drop it onto our matrix, and then we hit this little render preview button. And then it should, once it's thought about it, create that sort of final look. And so what it's done is the matrix is now sort of like cloning matrices across all of our vertexes, and then we're using the Redshift object tag to turn those matrices into sphere instances, and then we've just thrown like a white material on them to create, you know, that sort of similar-ish effect to, yeah, to this. So yeah.
Really nice. I like the way that you're constantly going back to the source to kind of replicate and check against what you're doing, because that's such an important part of these iterations.
Yeah, that was definitely my inspiration for
this. I know we've got to jump on to some of the other topics that we're going to cover, but Pedro has a very interesting question, or an it depends question. And is asking whether it's better to or do you render with a in-camera depth of field, or do you think it's better or perhaps faster to do a depth pass and then do that in post?
I would need to do it to know if it's faster. Because all I've ever done is kind of this way. But yeah, I can imagine it's probably faster to do like a normal render and then render the depth pass, but I'd have to do it to know instead of guessing, I think.
We've got Skulking in the background. We've got Noseman is answering some of the questions for us and has pointed out that in camera depth of field is more accurate, but post depth of field gives you more flexibility. And so on. In general, I'm paraphrasing slightly. But there's a good trade-off. It also depends on how many iterations and how many changes you need to make over time and how long the animation is and so on.
For me,
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
if
I
this
found
helps.
after, yeah, I rendered out and it took a couple of hours, and then I realized that I didn't have enough depth of field, and so I guess that's the downside. But yeah.
I
Go
don't
on,
know if
Chad,
this helps.
you were
Yeah,
going to jump in.
yeah, I don't know if this helps anyone, but for me, oftentimes when I'm doing like a post render over depth of field, like the way that things overlap can also often create kind of like a weird ugliness. So sometimes like the actual subject matter of what I'm doing kind of dictates whether I should just take the time to do it in camera in the render, or whether I can pull it off. Like if you have like a bunch of particles or whatever, you're probably okay. You know, if it's something in the background, you could probably just do it in post and it would be faster. But yeah, so that's a factor for me.
The quick last question for you, Elly. And Siddharth has got a great question. As someone who's interested in FUI and is just starting out, rather than a professional, is native Cinema 4D capable of producing great results without having to rely on external render engines, in this case, Redshift? And I would hazard a guess that because you know and love Redshift and you can work around the nodes pretty quickly, that's why you're jumping in there. But just as a general point, could you do this in just straightforward cinema?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you could create the same kind of material by using a Fresnel, and then inside the Cinema 4D standard materials, you have an alpha channel. And so that you can recreate the same look by kind of just stealing the same like effects, Fresnel alpha channel inside Cinema, inside like the standard renderer, and things like that. And then with the matrix, yeah, instead of worrying about kind of using the Redshift object tag to recreate the sphere instances, all you do is grab a cloner. So I'm not going to do it for now, but you'd grab a cloner, put a sphere into it, and then you could actually set the cloner to object mode, and then put, you know, the same object in there and set that to vertices. It might take a little bit longer. I mean, it will take a little bit longer because you're creating actual geometry inside Cinema 4D, whereas the Redshift way is quicker because it's just instancing spheres on matrices. So it is no geometry. But yes, 100% you could create this exact same thing without using Redshift.
Fantastic. We have a bunch more small questions about that particular technique, but what I was going to suggest is that this is why we run the Ask the Trainer sessions every other week. So that if you've got more of those questions, Elly's going to be around on that session this Thursday. So please jump into that and feel free to reach out to us, training@maxon.net. That comes across to the team, that email address, and so we can follow those up. But thank you for patiently waiting, Chad, because you've got some things that you also wanted to show. It's my fault for jumping in with all the questions and comments and so on. So
I can answer them in the chat as well if there are some.
Oh, it's fantastic. No, that's great.
Lots of great comments about how useful this technique is, and Elly, and people have been just jumping in with such an amazing example. So thank you for that.
No worries. Glad they liked it.
Right, Chad, I'm going to make you a presenter.
Okay, I will accept that. And are we seeing anything yet?
Yep.
Oh, are you seeing After Effects?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So for today's webinar, Elly and Nick kind of have like the feature presentations. They're going to be talking about Cinema 4D and Form, which are really like the big, you know, important ones, like the big, you know, flagship UI creation tools. And so I'm just going to talk for just a couple minutes. And so this is kind of like the intermission, you know, just like the between the two features. Like this is the let's all go to the lobby and have ourselves a treat portion of the webinar. But you know, sometimes you'll have a big end client that's going to pay you tons of money to create a really high end UI, kind of like we talked about last week with John. And then sometimes you know, you're doing an edit and someone asks you to create like a 3-second UI for just something that's in the background. Maybe like the, you know, voiceover copy mentions like the technology of the future. And so you need to create some kind of you know, FUI to go along with this like 3-second thing. And it just needs to be busy and look complicated or whatever. And for things like that, like you're just kind of like throwing it away and you're not trying to necessarily create something where you're inventing a new visual language or something like that. You're just trying to create something that looks intricate and very interesting. So I chose to focus on quantity, not quality, just to talk about, you know, a bunch of different ways to do things. I knew Elly was going to create something with a car. And so then I was like, okay, well, what if I created like an environment where that car could exist, not knowing what she was creating and like all that kind of stuff. But this is just like hypothetically, like, you know, like my guess. And I used a couple of interesting tools for this that, again, that go really quick. That was my focus. I first brought that same car model into After Effects using just brought in the Cinema 4D file and used Mirror with that. And Mirror is able to bring in 3D objects and use Cinema 4D files. So I brought that in, brought in the wireframe, and then I used this trick that I really love. It has these kind of like in the visibility section of a lot of Trapcode plugins, it has like near and far, and it's basically like a clipping plane. And so then I could use that, or I did use that, and actually, just so you can see this a little bit more clearly, maybe I'll crank up the wireframe just temporarily here. But then you could use this as kind of like a clipping plane to have objects kind of appear on or roll away or whatever. So that kind of like erodes into the, I'm closed up at, you know, 400%, but you could kind of see how this eats away at the car, or in this case, reveals it in kind of a cool way. So that's what I did for that. Actually, let me unsolo that. And another thing that I did that was I thought was kind of fun is that I basically created this, was like my main deal here. Let me move this out of the way real quick. So this is like my main UI thing that I created, this big like wide comp. And then I took it into the parent comp and I applied Horizon, Trapcode Horizon, which takes, you know, it creates like this invisible sphere and then maps a layer to this sphere. And so that creates this kind of like natural distortion. So then like when I have like this movement or whatever, you know, this is really just this flat comp moved around with Horizon. And it's kind of a quick trick to create an environment really quickly. I created you know, some distortion at the bottom, some Gaussian blur, and stretched it so that it creates these streaks and darkened a little bit so it feels like reflections and whatnot. But again, the real star of the show here is the HUD components effect from Universe. I love this effect for how quickly it is able to create a lot of complexity very quickly. There's tons of presets. If I go into the window menu, extensions, and then I go to the RG Universe dashboard, and then I go into the motion graphics area, HUD components, I can click on this. I feel like this is the most powerful effect in all of Red Giant Universe. And, you know, as you put your mouse over these presets, you can see what they do. And this is all fully customizable. So these aren't like rendered assets. These are like different components you have all access to. And so I often will come in here and use these as a starting point, and which I did a lot actually for this background stuff. Just apply the preset and tweak it. And again, this is not something, if you're designing something for Marvel, you're not going to come into Red Giant Universe presets and use presets. You're going to want to put like more thought into it and design it from scratch. But if you're just getting paid like much more minimally to do something very quickly, or you just need a lot of just texture in the background that looks complex, I mean, this is a great way to add these components. And again, it's not pre-rendered, so you have totally customizable access to all the ingredients that made this up, and they're very easy to tweak. And so like these little elements right here, like these circles, this is HUD components right here with all these complexities and whatnot. Also this graph and this audio waveform, this is all HUD components. And then another aspect of this is screen text, another one of my favorite effects, because it creates screen text based on actual code. So, one of the things that makes a UI look like a UI to me is that you have text describing what's going on, you have readouts, analysis, all that kind of stuff. And so being able to have all this text that kind of like writes itself on screen that's actually taken from actual code, that you don't have to write or find online, copy, paste, whatever, is great for adding tons of complexity really quickly. And also an extra little shout out to Array Gun, which I found is a great, I haven't really played with Array Gun very much before this, but I used Array Gun to create kind of like the basic grid. I'm just gonna show you this really quick. I created this basic grid, and then I created a lot of detail in that grid. If you could see that there's buttons to like subdivide the grid automatically in Array Gun. And so then I created these very complex sections with grid lines and these extra little areas of outline. Actually, let me just go back to the top comp so you can see a little bit more easily there. So like all of this stuff is Array Gun. So I used Array Gun as kind of like my baseline design tool to create the subdivided grids and the sections and the top and bottom lines and the areas, these like random shapes or whatever, to create those sections. I thought that was really fun. I had never really used Array Gun that much before. The last thing I want to show you just very quickly is that this is an old After Effects trick, but there's these expression controls which can be really helpful. So I created the color control effect, and then all the colors that I used in this are you clicked with expressions with the stopwatch just linked up to these expressions. So if I decided, I did this as blue and orange as a tribute to Simon. But if I decided at the last minute, like, actually, I think I want to try red as an accent color, I could go ahead and change that to red, and I could see what that looks like. And then all of the accent colors throughout my entire design change to update the red. Or if I wanted to take this blue and maybe like desaturate it or brighten it or whatever, I can do that with the touch of a button. Everything is linked up to these two expression controllers, which only takes like an extra couple seconds to set up, but then makes my design like very flexible. So anyways, a few more bells and whistles, but I think we're all ready to see what Nick has in store for us. So
it's interesting those techniques you mentioned, Chad, because I've talked with various studios that do exactly this when they're putting stuff together. So, and some major game developers playing around with the interface for some of their games do just the same thing, especially when you're pitching on different ideas for different customers. It's so fast to get the ideas in general and see if something is working visually before you then work into it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why I love Universe, and I'm always kind of like pushing it, because it's like I don't like when I like talk to people, I feel like people are kind of like, oh, I'm not using Universe for, I hear that so often. And then every once in a while I meet someone who's like using Universe and they're like, yes, it saves my life all the time, because you can do a lot of stuff like this where just you make a lot of complexity very quickly. They're very well designed tools. So yeah, it's good to know that people are using this stuff.
The presets almost seems to be a dirty word, but actually it's helped many people out to kind of kickstart the designs and then to tweak them. And I might have fallen off the fence in this particular case, but I would say that because there are so many different elements in those presets in the HUD design plugin, then that means that you can come up with stuff that looks actually quite unique, especially when you stack those on other layers.
Yes, very easily. It's like so easy to take a preset and make it look completely unrecognizable in seconds, but it's a great starting point. Yeah, absolutely.
Jesus has got a quick question, and he's asking about the plugin that shows the code. So screen text. Would you mind just bringing up the effects controls panel for that particular effect so we can see what it looks like?
Yeah. So let's see. Find. Let's see here. Yeah, so this is what screen text looks like. I'm trying to find where this layer, oh, there it is. So again, this is like super tiny, but this is the text that it's making, and this is what the effect actually looks like. And you go in here and you click choose a preset, and then here's all the different types of actual codes, like the iPhone crash log is like some of the text that they use, or the Linux boot up or whatever. This is like CryptoMiner stuff. these are all actual codes that you can use as a base, and then you could change, obviously, the glow and how fast it's scrolling, if there's a cursor or not, all those types of effects that you want, the font size, obviously, things like that. And so then you could tweak it there. But yeah, screen text is the effect. Actually, all of the text effects in Universe are incredible and worth checking out if you're doing UI design.
Just in case anyone's wondering, we did have a question from a couple of broadcasters. Could they use this screen text without risking people actually then saying, oh, what if we put that code in something? So the code is in the format that is accurate for each of those programming languages, but it doesn't actually run as a piece of code. So there aren't any Easter eggs in that, which is something we deliberately did.
Brilliant. I didn't know that. That's cool.
So it's fun stuff when you're recreating COBOL, for example. And the one other comment on this was Chad makes using Red Giant products so easy, and also using After Effects. Yeah, just chuck it into a control rig with expressions. It's so easy.
Well, thanks. I'm glad that that's what comes across. I appreciate that.
If you hadn't done a control rig, Chad, where would you start with this if you wanted to set that up?
A control rig for the colors?
Yes. Yeah.
I would start by just doing that. Like, I would go back retroactively and create, a layer and put the control things on it, set up my colors, and then you
where
can
do you
easily
find those? Sorry, I'm politely asking. Hey, show us just where to get started in the software if we wanted to do that.
Okay, sure. So you go to the expression controls, and there is a color control, and then you just drag and drop that to a layer. I create a solid layer, call it controllers, turn it into a guide layer so it doesn't render, add the color control effect, and then you make it, whatever color you want. And then when you have an effect like the HUD components effect, you just alt click the stopwatch, and then you take the pick whip and you drag it to this, the effect. So I might like maximize with the tilde key, this whole deal, open up my color control, and then I could take the pick whip to that. It's that simple. You don't have to write any code or anything. You just have to link it up to the color control, and then just do that with all of your layers. So instead of manually selecting a color swatch for an effect, you link it to the controller just using that. So it's like 2 extra step, alt click, drag the pick whip, but then you have a fully customizable design you could change at any time. So it's worth it.
Fantastic, thank you. That's such a useful trick. And also there's minimal coding involved. It's all drag and drop. So
yeah.
That's also a plus.
Yes, yes.
M's asking, are these kind of presets copyrighted? And the quick answer is they're completely copyright free. So you're available to use them in whichever project and however you would like, because they're part of the software. That's just like part of what you get when you have the subscription.
Yeah, they're just like settings.
Yeah,
just exactly. Settings for the software, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that's a good point, because all the presets are just settings. They're not special hidden designs that you can't get access to. You can start off with one and then just slightly tweak the settings as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Pedro
Thanks,
says...
Nick. Oh, sorry. No, you go.
All right, okay. I was just going to say Pedro really likes chromatic displacement and uses that a lot.
Yeah, it does add a bit to the that whole effect of kind of like, you're going through time a little bit, and it helps focus the eye too. That's pretty cool. Anyways, I was in the process of apologizing to Nick for taking his time, and then I went back to my design and I took more of his time. I'm sorry.
It's so cool though. I love it. How long did this take you? I was curious, like how long did it take you to put together, like if we were to focus on the HUD component part, how long did it take you to come up with all of those assets that make up your piece?
I mean, I was like fiddling and kind of playing, but like I would be able to like recreate this in maybe like, I don't know, an hour or two.
Very cool.
But I'm slower than most, I think. So
it doesn't look like it.
No.
Yeah, but that's the magic of this thing is, it's really, it creates complexity like really quick. So
I'm liking that trick with Horizon as well. Often I've used Horizon to wrap an HDRI image around, so you can then, whatever you rotate the camera. But this is a nice trick for using it for UI as well, just to keep it
cool.
non-square as well, and also reacts to camera movement.
Yeah, thank you.
Very cool. Great. And Aaron also mentioned, hey guys, I think you might just overrun, but we don't care because we love all the stuff. So every time we are risking of going a few minutes over, I apologize, and I think that's every time we've ever run a webinar. So one day we'll do it within the 60 minutes, but you can
I
always
think it
watch
might be
the
my
recording.
fault as well. I took a lot of the guide time.
No,
I had
I was
20
supposed
minutes, that didn't
I
happen.
was supposed to be like a 10-minute intermission, and that turned into like a 20-minute thing. So
Nick's just like speeding through now.
yeah.
We can just take the collective blame, can't we?
Yes.
Oh, it's my time. All
I'm
right.
throwing the screen at you, Nick.
Cool. So just to start off before I go into After Effects, my story came from looking at someone who's done a ton of presentations on the Maxon website, Robin Haddo, and she did some work on Atman and the Wasp, and I want to encourage everyone to check it out. In fact, one presentation that she had, I'm not sure if it's at NAB or SIGGRAPH, she breaks down how to build some components of this anomaly matrix, and in that uses Cinema 4D and X particles to create some of that design. When I took a look at some other features of the design on this page, it made me start to think about, Trapcode Form and what you could do with that and the various elements. So I focused on one particular part, and to my own personal restriction was to see how many different components I could basically create on just one layer, because Form in the last few versions now allows you to have up to 8 forms that could just live on one layer. And the other magical part about that is the fact that there's several items or properties inside of it that you can auto animate. So this is what I came up with within a couple hours. And this is a proxy, but I'm going to turn it off and actually just focus on one element here, which is this. This is all just existing on one layer. And there's a couple things about this. I'll just bring this into the designer without the optical glow. It's in a longer comp, but you can see that it is of 8 form components. And if you ever start off inside a form, you already have a series of single as well as multi-form presets, which would have from 1 to 8 different form effects on it at a given time. Now, the other great part about that preset gallery is the fact that you can save this to that this gallery, this actual effect. And that's what I did. I saved this as a preset, a multi-form system preset, by clicking on this button at the bottom of the graph. And if I look here, that's that element. And I just want to show you guys how light it is. So I'm going to head into my system and show this in the Finder on my Mac. And look at that size. Like it's under a megabyte. And if you're ever in a collaborative workflow, if someone builds a structure of 8 elements in form or 16 in particular, they're extremely lightweight. And the majority of this design only involved 2 form layers, which I could share, as well as archive for later use. And I think that that is one of a pretty cool thing about if you're working in a collaborative workflow with FUI. To focus on one of these elements within this design, I wanted to focus on one of my favorites within Form, which is box strings. And I have to just ask Chad, I'm just curious what your favorite is too, because I know that you've used this for quite a long time.
Yeah, my favorite form?
Yeah, your favorite form kind of, maybe. Let's go with form starting point.
That's a tough one. I tend to like the traditional like standard grid, and I also find that the 3D objects are really sexy. And actually, for my design, I wish I would have used form instead of mirror, but yeah. 3D
Cool.
objects and grids.
Yeah, and I recently started playing with this a little bit more, and in fact, I'm going to go into the designer so we can take a look at the box strings component, and then using a few of, we can maybe refer to these as effectors if we were trying to draw a parallel with Cinema 4D, and how we can manipulate our particles or our static particles in form and have them move in organic ways without having them live or die, like particular. So I'm going to go over to the box strings and just minimize the particles that are in Z. And as I'm in the designer, I love the way that this is laid out for you to use, or at least start off your work, for the fact is that I'm seeing the different components of form in blocks makes it really easy to make changes to it. I guess another element of that is anything that's grayed out here at the bottom of the form interface isn't currently in use. So if anyone ever sends you a design and you see one of these grayed out blocks, basically that means that nothing that is not currently in use. So I'm just going to increase the size of this by unlinking the X, Y, Z individual controls and expanding it to the length of the comp. And then I'm just going to run some quick animation on this. And the way that I did this was primarily with a fractal field, and then limiting the fractal field to one displacement axis. So inside this mode, I switched the mode to XYZ individual, and then started to displace this on the Y axis, I believe. Now, the one thing about this displacement by default is it affects the entire form layer uniformly. And the real strength of this comes down to taking this fractal strength and minimizing it within certain sections of the graph. So let's just say that we wanted to do that on the x-axis. We could come down here, and I'll actually, instead of using the standard graph that's been here for a while, use one with Bezier points. And simply drag down, well, that's a little too extreme, in certain sections, the amount of fractal influence that's being applied to these box strings. There's also this randomize effect, which allows you then to play around with different graph settings so that you can get the look that you want. Now, in the original After Effects composition that I had, I also minimized these box strings opacity to a specific area so that it didn't run into some of the other elements that were part of the design. And I simply just went to the opacity over life graph in that case and applied the same technique. So over the x-axis, and then in certain sections brought down opacity so that that set of box strings didn't appear or appear over a specific element. The other part of this design, I know I'm close to running over, so I'm going to try to keep this quick and just take a look at the second layer here, which is just what made up the form grid. And in many cases, as Chad, you were using your effect to create grids, the HUD components within Universe, which I think is great. I just used a form to create those static grids or dots and referenced various sprites. And this is what I came up with. It was a collection of, I think, just 5 layers within form. And in this case, I wanted to have multiple sprites be referenced, or multiple images be referenced here for this animation. I thought I would break down how that was put together. So I'll go into the designer, and I will solo that item. And I just did that by option clicking on the eye icon for that form layer. You'll see in the designer, it only shows this one image, but that's okay. What I actually did to kind of get this random mapping, I selected a preset 3D model that's in the form library. I'll just show you. You can actually see this small thumbnail right here. And these are all the various 3D models that you have access to. And it was one of these sphere arrays. I think I might have already passed it, or it's this one right here. So that's what I chose as the model to map spherical particles to originally. And then after that, I chose one sprite from this library. So under sprite, which is your own image or graphic, just like we saw on HUD components, here is an entire library of graphics that you can use for your form-based design. Now, the one limitation of the designer is I chose this one locator, and I wanted to actually have multiple locators. So once I chose this, what actually happens when you go inside of After Effects is it will bring that sprite, that individual element. If let us solo that too. That's the square. Here's the dash. That's dashed lines. Third time's a charm. Okay, there's the locator that was brought inside. And if you right click it inside of After Effects, you can reveal this in the Finder, and it will bring you to where all of the other presets of sprites are saved with form. So then I could just bring this in, or I brought in one other element. I believe it was the dashed line, and dragged it directly into my comp. And I took those two elements, the locator and that other element, and I placed them in a pre-comp where each of those was one frame long, and simply switched on the form layer. If we head to the form grid and take a look here in the sprite section, I instead switched it, instead of a sprite from the library, to a texture inside my composition in that pre-comp. And by selecting the random still frame, I was able to get a reference of two of these graphics spread over that 3D model.
Brilliant, dude.
And that was it. And so I have those, basically these two elements are saved as form presets for later use, right? Just in the library, and super lightweight, like again, like way under a megabyte, which is fantastic. And then I can share them with Chad and Elly and Simon to use later on. And that's what I had to show.
That's amazing.
Oh, thanks, Chad.
Yeah, it looks so cool.
Very cool. Yeah, super cool.
It's also creatively using some of the resources that are inherent in the installation, and that's a nice way of revealing where they are.
Yeah, I'd never thought about bringing stuff in from the Finder that way. That's great.
Cool.
Dick is asking about the designs, and inherently, some of the presets, or most of the presets, are very nice and tidy and clean, and so on, and is wondering about how we then would represent things that aren't nice and tidy and clean and are well put together. And I think the reason, I would hazard a guess that the reason that they are like that, in fact I know the reason why they like that, is because then you can mess them up with some of the other tools, and it gives you the opportunity of doing that. So that if you wanted to say add a distortion or roughen edges or something like hollow matrix to those actual elements, then you could do that. And then that would be a way where you can begin to subvert the expectations of that nice, beautiful interface.
Yeah. And just to add, Simon, I was thinking just about your example, Chad, with HUD components. So Chad could save HUD components, and you could add like a texturize effect in Universe, which is a grunge-based filter, and then combine that with a roughen edges. And in After Effects, you can take all three of those effects and then save it as a preset. And then that could be sort of your start to that dirtier textured images, but you still have that starting place of your clean graphic.
Yeah, I know we're like over a little bit, but I actually didn't have time. I didn't want to take up any more time, but I actually did use a texturizer in the background on my thing because you taught me about it, Nick. Like you told me like texturizer, and he's like, you were like, you gotta check it out. It's cool. You can do all this stuff. So then I did, and like now I use it all the time. And so I use it as like a little bit of texture in the background, and that was like a little tribute to you, and I didn't have time to get into it, but yes.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. And I know there was someone else in the thread, Simon, who was mentioning chromatic aberration. And I think one cool thing about that is it also has like built-in textures, like for lenses, like so you have a frozen texture, and by bringing them to subtle amounts, you could also like continue like the dirtification. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to go with it. The dirtification of your like clean-based graphics.
That's the new show title.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because once something's dirtied, then it's dirtied in that way. And like that's kind of its identity. But if it's clean, then you could dirty up however you need to for something.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Pulled apart and dirtification. One quick question from TJ, actually, Nick. Would you mind just quickly bringing up your screen again? Because TJ is asking how you manage to make those boxes float up and down. And it's just such a useful thing inside Form that it's just worth pointing out. Plus the fact that because Form is animated by a fractal, you can loop these things, which is super useful.
Yes, and actually, I didn't even show how that was moving up and down, so I'm glad that you mentioned it. And I'm assuming you're talking about these locators? Yes, these locators, right? Is that what we were looking at?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so if I go just here inside of the designer, I've already soloed this element, and in this case, what did I use? Oh yeah, I just used a fractal field again, and it's a pretty high displacement, 111, and then if you look over down here, there's a flow to it. That, by the way, this flow can also be looped, which is just amazing if you need repetitive graphics. And you can choose the time that you want those to loop. But that's what's creating the subtle oscillation movement between these icons. There's also some text elements in this piece, which live outside of universe that I'll just point to, because they also, one of those moves up and down. It's this piece of text. And I actually just used a very simple After Effects expression called math.sin and math.sign. And what it does is every 2 times per second, it moves a certain amount of 90 pixels in the Y position, and it starts at 540 pixels on the screen. So that's what's creating that movement there with the actual text. And what's, I think, awesome going to HUD components inside of Universe, this oscillation tool is built in. In fact, it doesn't involve, you can change the animate mode in HUD components. In fact, Chad, I think there were some of your graphics that already had that. And you can just slide up the parameter in Y or X or in rotation to have something oscillate, but without any keyframes or expressions to like speed up those FUI graphics.
Yeah.
There's one question that often gets asked about Form, which is why use Form when we have particular and vice versa? And I think this is one of the answers. It depends on whether you want your particles to live forever or be immortal, as it says on the website. But the other key thing is that loop section. So if you ever need a particle and you're struggling with how you might animate it and get it back to the same location with particular, Form is very useful for this. So just a couple of other things. Let me share my screen. Here we go. Make me a presenter for this. And here we go. So something that Thanasis, or AKA Noseman, asked me to mention was the fact that he's running a whole series on Cineversity that actually gets into FUI. So if you have access to Cineversity, check out his Talos series. So just search for Talos in here, and there's a whole range of them. And so we're about to jump into an FUI elements and FUI aspects of it. So specifically, it's using Redshift. So the FUI updates in Redshift. And he's open to suggestions. If you'd like to see this in the standard renderer, please do. And this FUI one is the edition that's about to be released. And here's just a quick screen grab from the first episode. So there's lots of very useful stuff, as always, as he puts together in there. So we'll put this link in the descriptions chat when we publish the recording on YouTube in a couple of hours' time as well. And I know we'll get this question, but if you have anything to share in terms of project files from today's sessions, Elly, Chad, or Nick, please let us know, and we'll put those into the Dropbox download folder so people can have a play with that too.
Sweet.
Yeah, I didn't put you on the spot. I didn't say which ones you could share. Because I know we technically can't share the Turbosquid model, because that's what, but we can certainly share the link to it on Turbosquid.
I could just take the car out of mine and I'll share mine.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much, Chad. And just as a reminder, you don't need the link. You can just go to YouTube and search for Maxon Training Team, and then we've got all the stuff there. All the stuff, all the recordings for the last year or so of webinars that we've done every week, and sometimes there'll be multiple ones per week. This has been so useful, everyone. And lots of nice comments coming in on the questions area. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it. And just a reminder that there are so many tools in Universe, so it's great just to see, oh yes, of course, Texturize. Why haven't I been using that recently? Throw it on. We like to joke that in terms of going back to the clean versus the distorted, what do we call it, dirtificated graphics? The Universe is really the tool that you can also use just to make everything look terrible. When everything is looking beautiful and clean and you've got it in 4K resolution, just throw on some of those and just make it look beautifully dirty. Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks for your comments about overrunning. And we would, and we try to respect everyone's time, but it's a balance because we just got so much great stuff to share. But appreciate it. Thank you. Cool. So any spoilers ahead of next week, team, that you want to give out, or shall we just let everyone know that we'll be doing some more FUI magic this time next Monday?
I think next week's gonna be fun. I think, do we have a tentative plan? Can we release the tentative plan, or should we keep that under wraps?
Oh, you can absolutely release it.
Well, I think their thing is we're gonna pick something from our favorite movie, kind of like Nick did, and pick something from a movie and then try to recreate it. But it's gonna be like a surprise for everybody. So none of us know what's gonna happen, and it'll be fun. Surprise everyone, like, hey, I picked this movie and this is what I got.
We don't even know.
We don't, yeah. Surprise to ourselves. Also, I vote that Nick redoes his Ant-Man and the Wasp thing. I want to see more of how to make that thing. That was cool. And
if you can come back with the whole film done, that'd be great.
Okay. Bring all the assets. Got it.
No pressure.
On my to-do list for the next year.
Excellent. And if you're looking for any of the links we've mentioned and also the download files, we'll post those all in the YouTube description as well. So thank you so much, everyone. And thanks, Elly, Chad, and Nick for sharing all those things. As ever, that's beautiful work. Thank you. Or should I say terrible, dirtified work? Fantastic. Well, thanks for attending, everyone. Appreciate the time. And we will see you next week on our next episode.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.